Hello everybody, I'm Heidi Wilding. I am from Texas and I'm currently an undergraduate studying at BYU. I'm studying environmental science and I am working in Dr. Ben Abbott's ecology lab. So I'm here to present a project that was done and this is my first time presenting in this fashion, in this style, so bear with me, I might stumble a little bit, but I'm doing my best and I'm excited to be able to share this data with you guys. So the project that I'm here to present is about megafires. There was a megafire, well, quite a few years ago, and back in October of 2018, and then there was a hurricane that caused flash flood just about a month after. And so we did some data, or we collected some data on those two events and how they affected each other and how the climate or how the watershed was affected by those events. So to start, I want you to think about your relationship with natural disasters. When I was a kid, I grew up in Texas, in central Texas, in the Austin area. And it was really just like a normal climate. It wasn't ever crazy cold. Sometimes it was crazy hot, but that's Texas. But, you know, we never had crazy floods, we never had crazy snowstorms, anything like that. It was just a moderate climate. And so hearing about hurricanes, hearing about fires, floods, things like that, it was a very distant thing to me. I didn't have a connection with it. However, in 2017, there was a hurricane, and it affected a lot of places in Texas. Luckily, my home was okay. But Houston, which was it's 2 or 3 hours away from my house, was severely affected. There was, thousands and thousands of homes just destroyed. And along with a few other church volunteers, me and my dad went to Houston to help muck out houses and clean all of that up. And it was the first, in-person, real interaction I've ever had with that kind of a natural disaster, with a natural disaster at all. It was really striking for me. You learn when you're a kid, like, fire is bad, and a year after that hurricane, I came to BYU and started studying. It was the first time I'd ever lived in Utah. And then there was wildfires everywhere. And it was very new to me. It was very strange and scary to me because that just wasn't a thing in my life growing up. I was always so disconnected from it. However, through those experiences, I started to be able to see it up close, to be able to hear stories about it, to smell it. In the case of the flood in Houston, there was some rotten food. And we can smell it in the air. When there's a fire, we can taste it. We can sometimes even feel it. And so, these disasters, they're called natural disasters, so they might not be unnatural. However, they are increasingly happening at a higher and unnatural rate. Climate change is a large cause of this. It's causing larger wildfires and more extreme precipitation events in a lot of different places. So these ecological disturbances are increasingly coinciding. And as that's happening, stacking blocks, the higher you stack, the farther it's going to fall. And so the more extreme events that are happening, the more harm comes to our environment. So specifically today, we're going to talk about how ecological disturbances alter lateral fluxes of sediment, organic matter, and nutrients. And we're going to specifically focus on stream chemistry response of watersheds in the semiarid region of Utah. Specifically the region that was affected by the megafire that happened in October of 2018, followed by the extreme precipitation event. So what we did is we analyzed daily to hourly water samples at 10 stream locations from before the storm event until 3 weeks after its conclusion. And we tested it for suspended sediment, solute and nutrient concentrations, water isotopes, and dissolved organic matter concentration, as well as optical properties and reactivity. And what we found was that as big of an effect these disasters do have, the biggest change that would happen, or the biggest improvement that we could find to increase socioecological resilience of surface water would be reducing anthropogenic nutrient sources. So I'm going to present a few slides, and this first one just talks about natural disasters in general. So because of our change in climate, there's been a lot of change in precipitation frequency, type, and location. And in addition to that, as the population of humans is growing on this earth, there is a large increase of demand of water. And so the more people, the more the climate is affected. And it kind of goes exponentially. So you can see in this slide what is currently happening in Utah. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I want you to focus on just the trends that you see. So first, from 1900 to 2020, that's 120 years, the flow volume of the Colorado River flow has significantly decreased, while temperature has significantly increased, and precipitation has remained relatively the same. And so this again is emphasizing the point that we are using up more water, temperatures are rising, the earth, the clouds, the atmosphere isn't giving us any extra water just because we're using it more. It's staying the same, but we are depleting the resource. So now let's look at this slide, talking about wildfires. It's hard to say is a wildfire good or bad, because there are really good things that come from it and there's really bad things that can't come from it. Bad things generally have to do with humans. Wildfires can endanger human lives, can decrease the quality of the air, which affects human lives as well, can also affect vegetation, wildlife, water cycles, erosion, all sorts of things. However, in contrast, wildfires can also be a very good thing. Wildfires are natural events that happen, whether there were humans or not. And it cleans forests, provides nutrients for future soil, and creates sites for a new vegetation life cycle. So it is a natural cycle that the environment goes through. So this graph always makes me laugh a little bit, because it makes it look like climate change is starting in 1987, because that's when the orange begins. However, this graph is just trying to highlight the point that wildfires may be growing naturally. However, they're exponentially growing when we introduce human effects onto the environment. So, to define a megafire, it's a fire that is greater than 100,000 acres. With just viewing its behavior, it's defined as extreme. It is difficult to suppress and very costly to do so. It destroys habitats, and the natural regeneration is more difficult. It takes a lot more time. So that is the general definition of a megafire. And wildfires affect hydrology in many different ways. They decrease vegetation. Obviously, you're burning up all the vegetation. Things such as, runoff increases nutrients in water, increases the hydrophobicity, which is the fear of water, the repelling of water in soil, which then increases erosion, increases water temperature, and increases the presence of pyrogenic compounds. So then that begs the question, why do we care? Yes, wildfires exist, and yes, they do affect hydrology, but why do we care? Why, as humans, does that matter to us? And it all comes down to something called eutrophication. And this is a very, very key point when we're looking at hydrology and wildfires. Because as nutrients and sediment are released from those wildfires, it pollutes human water sources, which, as I mentioned before, we have an increasing human population with an increasing demand of water.
So removing those or contaminating those resources is extremely dangerous. So with eutrophication, that is nitrogen and phosphorus coming in from outside sources, whether that be from the atmosphere or from runoff from a wildfire. And these nutrients cause an increase in phytoplankton. They are able to eat those nutrients and then reproduce much more rapidly. And as those phytoplankton are doing so, they are using up oxygen, which turns a previously aerobic atmosphere into an anaerobic or environment, I should say. And so that causes algal blooms, which causes decay. And so really it's just a system that pollutes the water, kills organisms, and decreases biodiversity. You can see the picture on the bottom right is one example or one view of an algal bloom. And so this river that you can see has gone through eutrophication. So now let's look at our very specific example from the Megafire in 2018. It's called the Pole Creek Fire Complex. Includes 3 different fires that happened August 4th, 24th, and September 6th. And these 3 combined to make over 100,000. They met the criteria of that Megafire criteria of over 100,000 acres, and they actually reached over 150,000 acres of burned area. Luckily, no humans were injured, and there were no homes destroyed. However, there were a lot of people evacuated, the air quality plummeted, and there was a lot of economic destruction that came from that. So now we're going to look at the combining of these natural disasters. This is representing Hurricane Rosa from October of 2018. Began on the 2nd, began landfall, and it hit Utah on October 3rd. And it was extreme precipitation, very abnormal. And just to show, it's 10.5 centimeters in that one short flash flood, which is 25% of the annual precipitation in a matter of days. So here's a lovely before and after picture from the Spanish Fork River. Like I said in the beginning, natural disasters are real, and it makes it all the more real when we can actually see what's happening. So I wanted to show this picture to show, with your eyes you can see it, and then with the data you can really see it. So this is our study area. It includes Utah Lake. The watershed is over 2 million acres, and it is hyper-eutrophic. Utah Lake has this stigma of being a disgusting, nasty, smelly lake, which it is, if I'm being entirely honest, and that is because of eutrophication. So, here is a map of the burn severity. You can see the darker red is where the burn happened in a more severe manner, and then the yellow is much lighter. So the way we collected our data, we went to 10 sampling locations. Again, I said earlier we did it on either daily or hourly basis, and we looked at the data in a burn versus unburned way, and also in a human versus natural influence way. And human influence was measured anything greater than 10% land use. That was signified human influenced area. So here's the tools that we used. We measured UV using a visible spectrophotometer that measured light absorbance. We had auto samplers that were in the water and measured every hour, different measurements. And we took samples daily, and we both took filtered and unfiltered samples. And through the analysis of those, we looked at water age class, we looked at dissolved organic material, we looked at optical properties, just what we could see and how the structure changed. And we also compared biodegradation and photodegradation. So first let's look at sediment yield. Sediment yield is defined as the amount of sediment per unit area removed from a watershed by flowing water over a period of time. So, in this graph on the bottom right, you can see the Spanish Fork location right at the start on the 2nd of October. The sediment dump was extreme. It skyrocketed, and it only took about 3 or 4 days to get right back where it started. So this is a very fast process. And you can compare it to the Hobble Creek data, which is virtually a flat line at the bottom of that graph. That is the unaffected area. So you can see that on the second day, on the 4th of October, that sediment load reached up to, well, over 9 million kilograms. It's a lot of sediment being dumped, and that's because of that rainfall that fell just after the fire that brought that water to the watershed. So next let's look at water age class. So on the graph on the bottom right, the higher up it is, the closer to 0 the values are, which means the newer the water is. And newer water just means it's gotten to the consumer faster, whatever that consumer may be, humans or otherwise. And the newer water is kind of just a way to say the better quality water is. And so in natural unburned areas, there was much less deuterium, which is, it's kind of like an expanded hydrogen molecule that is caused by extreme conditions. And so that suggested to us that infiltration and groundwater recharge was happening at a healthy level. The newest water was found in human areas, and next was found in burned areas. However, the variability was highest in the anthropogenically influenced watersheds. So, newest water was always getting to humans, next to the burned areas, and in places where there were a lot of anthropogenic influences into the water, the variability was highest, which means the water quality was much less predictable, which, again, going back to us as humans needing to use water and having an increasing demand for water, the quality of that water is extremely important. So let's talk about nitrogen. There were very significant differences in natural environments versus human anthropogenically influenced environments. So looking on the left of this graph, whether it was burned or unburned water sources in the natural environment, there was virtually no or little to no effect from those fires. However, when we just compare that, looking from the left to the right in that natural environment to the human environment, burned or not, anthropogenic influence was the biggest factor contributing to the nitrogen, the amount of inorganic nitrogen. And it was shockingly much more abundant at the unburned human locations. So now phosphorus. This is the other ingredient for eutrophication. It's a little different, as you can see here. There's much less of that stark difference, and it's more of a difference in the form that the phosphorus came in. So now let's take a look at carbon. You can see on the left we have a graph of dissolved inorganic carbon, and on the right there is dissolved organic carbon. The blue is the unburned sites, and the orange is the burned sites. The highest finding of dissolved inorganic carbon was in burned, anthropogenically influenced areas, and the highest influence, or the highest finding of dissolved organic carbon was in the burned natural environment. So our next part of the experiment was incubation, and this was to test the degradability of the samples. We put one under light to test photodegradability. We put one in the dark to test biodegradability, and we used a control just in regular sunlight in a photo priming way, and that was our control. So as we can see in this slide, there is a much higher photodegradability in the burned areas and a marginally higher photodegradability in human environment. And then with biodegradability, we see a much higher percentage in the human burned sites. However, in the natural sites, There's a relatively low difference between between burned and unburned. And then when we look at the photopriming, again, both the burned sites are much higher, and we can see that even in the natural environment, it's higher than in the human environment. So that was a lot, but here are a few key takeaways that we found. Essentially, megafires influence sediment load in a big way. Megafires change the structure of organic matter, and they make it more photodegradable. Human sampling locations showed the highest stormwater influence, followed by burned areas. And anthropogenic influences affected inorganic nitrogen concentrations. So those are the general takeaways that we found from this. And looking forward into the future, megafires are predicted to become more common. And so we do need to be aware of the impacts that humans are having on the ecosystem and the ways that humans are being affected by these. Because megafires are increasingly common and increasingly unpredictable. So it's extremely important to know how to handle that when it comes. So again, just a review of why we care. Nutrient and sediment release from wildfires can pollute human water sources. And when water bodies already suffer from eutrophication, when most water bodies do, it's hard to afford more. Aquatic habitats, especially in lake habitats, already threatened, fragmented. And I mean, we can see that in our own Utah lake, right up the street. So we need to do every little thing that we can to prevent pollution and climate change, because those are the biggest factors that are contributing to all of this. We need to find new ways to clean human waste products from water, because we have our blue, green, gray, and black water sources, and we're not treating them so well. We need to look at stream river networks, and we need to potentially remove infrastructure that is hurting the habitat. We just need to be careful. I truly believe that the world is changing in mindset in regards to the environment. You see more and more jobs opening every day of environmental consulting, because that is becoming an increasingly important issue that we need to talk about. And the last thing that we can really do is enjoy nature. We need to love nature. We need to be in it. We need to know what it is that we are protecting, what it is that we need to protect, that we need to be in charge of. At the end of this, I invite all of you to be thinking of ways that we can clean water. I and a coworker were having a discussion the other day, and he was like, I want to build a filter that you can just put in lakes after a wildfire, after a disaster, that can just filter out that nitrogen and excess carbon and that phosphorus and all those things, all those sediments. I was like, sounds like you're building a dam to collect logs and sticks and leaves. But just those conversations that we can have are incredibly important, because that little spark of an idea is going to bring him to come up with many more ideas that are possible, ideas that we won't know if they work until we try them. So I encourage all of you to be thinking, observe the water around you, be wise with your water usage, do everything that you can to prevent natural disasters like fires or things like that. Be wise in your use, in your agricultural use. Know what you're eating, know what water you're drinking, and enjoy nature. Just breathe the fresh air every once in a while, especially before it gets too cold. So if you want to get in contact with me, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, or if you have any questions for the lab, here is also Dr. Ben Abbott's contact information. He is the mentor in our mentored research. Thank you.